work if you want to push it out then.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be easier to do. And
Not saying that we couldn't do it,
I
but
don't know.
it might take me a bit.
We can get it out, get it pushed back up to the wall where I want it. It's going to be another issue, but actually we might put it behind the Intrepid because, like I say, I'll go get a fuel pump for it.
So you didn't have any in the stuff that any of the parts you got, huh?
I haven't gone through there to see if we have the right part number. You know, it would have been handy. When they donated the parts from the Ford dealership, they eventually brought me a list of part numbers.
I don't see why they don't. I mean, because
And when they did it for their GMC dealership, they didn't bring me a list, so.
that's weird because when you donate stuff for tax purposes, you have to have all that documented anyway.
Well, they have a way of writing it off. They could have thrown it all in the trash. It's the way that's set up with General Motors and Ford too, apparently. Yeah, they could have just thrown it all in the trash. And so they didn't have to donate it. So they didn't really need, because that was one of the things that I was dealing when I was dealing with Todd Griffin. He's the general manager. I told him, I said, well, if you give me a list and all this, I can get them to get you a letter for tax reasons. And he said, I really don't need that.
All right.
But I went ahead and did it, you know.
Yeah.
And he wanted us to do a write-up in the paper and all that, you know, and I said, sure.
Excuse me.
And then this last go-round, I haven't actually talked to him since we went and got the last pallet. Not even sure that's the last pallet, but it's the last time the parts manager down there called me, you know, and got it. So,
Excuse me, ma'am.
I need to call him and see, make sure there wasn't something else going on that I didn't know about.
Excuse me.
There'll be some nasty stuff dealing with this Nate test.
How was your Friday? Was it pretty?
Oh, I didn't do anything.
Oh.
I did some stuff at the house, but I didn't.
I thought you had to do a
I
whole
didn't do
bunch of.
anything that I needed to do.
Oh. Yeah, I know. It's kind of how my
Crazy,
weekend
I had
went.
this in my garage. There's a water line that comes out into my garage and goes down the wall both ways, and a hydrant on each end of the house. And with a shut-off valve inside, so during the wintertime I shut that off and drain it. Well, it comes out of the wall at a, about, I don't know, it's probably about this high, and it runs downhill that way to a hydrant, about that much drop, and then it comes over here and it makes a 90 and another 90 and goes to that hydrant. And it had, I should say, now a T with a Schrader on it, where you can take an air tank or nozzle, hook your tire up and blow the water out of it, which is not very effective, but it's like it's running downhill, Well, so this year, and it's what I normally do, because that place has a sprinkler system in the ground too, and so it has a big manifold out there in the ground that goes to all the different solenoids for all the different lines, and they put a regular old hose bib on the end of it. So what I do is have an adapter that threads on, water hose end, female end, thread that onto that hose bib. After I shut that water off, open it up, and I hook my compressor to that. And that way I can cycle all the solenoids and blow all that out. This year, my adapter, I left it in my camper up in Clark. So it's like, well, I'll build me another one, But anyway, so I shut the waters off, back in the fall, and then I opened the hydrants there at the house on that one, in the garage, and went through and cycled all the sprinkler pump there, solenoids and all that. and forgot about it. But it's like the one in the house is, in the garage is like, that ain't gonna, I mean, even if it does freeze, it ain't gonna hurt nothing, because the hydrants are open and all that. Well, so we're out there one day, I was grilling something, this has been about a month ago, I guess. Train said, come here, look at this, I saw this drip. And the crazy part of it is that line that runs across the wall at an angle like this had split open on the bottom down there partway.
Where the water had settled and froze?
Kidding me? Because it was still uphill to the hydrant, from the hydrant. And I had the hydrant open, you know.
See, I always thought that if you had stuff open too, it wouldn't freeze.
Right. Well, the other part of that is I get to looking at it, and that other part of that line where it went over that 90 down and the 90 over, it had pushed that one piece of pipe out of that 90 where that air fitting was, pushed it completely out. There was a gap like that just hanging in the air.
Oh, wow.
It's like, I look at that, it's like, that's crazy. So, anyway, so I went in there and chopped and patched and all that stuff, and the hydrant on the front side of the house was messed up, and it acted like the rubber seal was stuck inside. And so I'm going back and forth, and finally went, rip. And so I threaded the nut out, and it ripped the splines off the center. So I just put that hydrant on there last year. It's like cheap crap, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think that was caused from freezing. But that line being pushed apart definitely was.
Yeah. I noticed too, like with Home Depot, because when I got my Great Dane, had to go out, and the way my house is, because it's so old, it's like 115 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So my spigots are right at ground level, like maybe this far up.
Right.
So yeah, he hit them and busted my front one, so I haven't been able to use it for a year now. And I went in to go, because you know how you can usually pop that top off, because what it was is they had those plastic,
Oh yeah.
the knob on the top, and he just messed up the seal between it. So I took that apart, went down to Home Depot to see if I can find the parts to put new gaskets and everything in it, and they don't sell them like that. They sell them in a whole piece.
Right.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
so now I got to go in and cut it off and put it on, and that's what I got to do this summer too.
Yep.
Sometimes I hate home repairs.
I do too. I don't know. I guess maybe I kind of got burnt out when I built my house.
I think a lot of it too, like you're saying, when they sell you garbage all the time, you have to redo it so
Yeah,
much.
that's the other part of it.
It's hard to find quality parts for stuff anymore, it seems, for outdoor plumbing with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've noticed.
And it's like, you know, this faucet is going through a brick wall into the garage, so it needs to be a foot long. Okay. I understand that a foot long one should cost more than a 6-inch one. Not that much more, okay?
Yeah.
Because it's a piece of copper pipe, and a little bit more of that center shaft is the only thing that's longer.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It is.
It's
They're a
like
lot more.
$45 for this hydrant, where the 6-inch one was 20.
Yeah, I know. That's what I seen that too, and I'm like, because that's about what I had to have on mine.
Yeah.
Because
Ridiculous.
the other one won't even fit through the wall.
Yeah.
Because mine's the same way. It's gonna have because we got that sandstone on the bottom. So that sandstone's like almost 2 feet thick.
Yeah. It's like, you know, I could buy the 6-inch one and then sweat my piece of pipe in there and slide it through. But it'd be hard to check and make sure that sweat fitting didn't leak, you know,
Yeah.
with a flashlight or whatever.
Yeah.
But so I didn't. I broke down and bought the $100 one.
Excuse me. Hopefully it lasts anyway.
Okay, this is doing crazy stuff this morning. had an adventurous evening yesterday. We went to Star Valley yesterday, drove around over there. Coming back, we were almost to the interstate over there on Highway 30 coming down. Came up on a head-on collision.
Oh, wow.
And there wasn't any police or anything right there at this point. There was like a semi-truck coming from the other direction and 4 or 5 cars coming the same way we were going, and there were people running around. They had one guy laying right in the middle of the road.
Oh, God.
And the truck that was hit, all I saw was one vehicle from where we were, and it was an old like 68 Ford truck. You know how strong those are?
Yeah.
That truck was smashed far back. Well, Padilla, our campus cop, was there. He was behind us, I guess. He pulled in behind us and went up there, and there was people running around. I'm just staying away from that. Not much I can do anyway. And anyways, somebody was trapped in one of the vehicles, but I couldn't even see the other vehicle
Oh, wow.
from where we were,
Huh.
because there was cars sitting here, and then one guy pulled his truck up in the middle of the road, had his flashers going, and so, you know, we were probably 50 yards from it or a little further. There was just all kinds of crap in the road.
Wow.
And so, anyway, YDOT showed up with a truck with a big flashing sign, you know, to mark a wreck, and so they backed us all up and all that. Well, first they said they were going to have a chopper coming in to haul this guy. Probably didn't have something taken, I don't know, but man, I forgot to call this guy back. So anyway, it's like, you know, there's not a way around much.
Yeah.
The guy said, you can go down here and go on this JT Road, TG Road. Goes into the Tronox plant and hits County Road 11, which is the paved road. Comes out over on, where 348 or wherever it is. Okay, we'll go that way. That's a long ways around, but it gets you over to the road coming, you know, from Fontenelle down.
Yeah.
But it was another hour, probably. We can get home to about 9 o'clock. But I don't know. Hopefully they survived.
Yeah, hopefully they
That
did.
was all. And it was kind of crazy because it's like there's a set of black marks that's like 100 yards long. And I know it was the old truck because, you know, no analogs,
Yeah.
drum brakes, they always lock the rear up and slide.
Yeah.
And it's like if I was sliding that far, I'd have hit the ditch before I hit them people head on.
Yeah.
Because he was in the left lane.
Oh, really?
I mean, the black marks were in the left lane. I'm assuming they were his. I don't know, because I never even saw the other vehicle.
Yeah.
And it's like,
So is this a 2-lane?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. And so apparently he was passing somebody
oh.
and didn't see the oncoming vehicle until, well, my initial thoughts were 100 yards of black marks. He had time to do something to keep from hitting that car. You know?
Yeah.
Now, whether the person next to him panicked and got on the brakes and is sliding along beside him, well, there wasn't any black marks on that side. But that's kind of what happens a lot of times. Is this person that they're passing panics, and they both hit the brakes at the same time, and now they can't go anywhere.
Right.
You know? If the guy in the right would stay the same speed, either the guy slow down and get behind him, or this guy, you know, if he got on his brakes first, this guy can get in front. But
Yeah.
I don't know. You never know on that. But it's like, man, if I'm sliding 100 yards before I hit somebody, I'm going in the ditch.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing out there.
Right.
You know, it's going to be a rough ride, but it's not going to be, you know, not going to kill you,
Yeah.
more than likely. But And so I'm assuming the guy probably didn't have a seatbelt on when he was laying in the pavement in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
It was probably the guy out of the truck. But I don't even know what the other vehicle was.
That's one thing I think in Fords I've never really liked is their restraint system just sucks. Like Willie was saying, because they all run the Fords out there too at the mine.
Yeah.
And he's like, as soon as you get in, the guys driving never give you a few seconds just to put your seatbelt on. As they get going, there's any jarring or any bouncing, he says there ain't no way you're gonna get that seatbelt out and put it on. He's like, and they're going 80.
Right.
He says you're hitting those bumps. He says every time you hit a bump, that's, it's sticking, so you can't. And
Yeah, right.
I've noticed that with Fords, they're really bad for that. If we're even on a slight incline or decline, those seatbelts in our little car that we had, or even in, my pickup's not so bad, but his pickup's terrible for it.
Yeah.
You can't even get it out if
Yeah.
it's sitting at an incline, so you gotta be flat, you gotta be, can't be moving.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of people won't put them on.
Well, that old Ford, it was old enough it wouldn't have had shoulder belts anyway. It just lap belts,
Yeah.
And so, he may have had it on. As far as that truck was hit, it may have broken.
Yeah.
That's another thing. It was.
Because didn't you say too, you're supposed to change your seatbelts out?
Anytime there's any fraying or anything like that, that's what they say. Yeah, there's not really an interval to change them out.
You kind of wonder because they're sitting in the sun, and you know what I
Right.
mean? Because I know in a lot of those old ones, I've gone out to junkyards and you can pull them, you can just rip them in half.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just from them sitting in the sun for so long.
Huh. Yeah, I've never seen that. But-
Mostly in the Volkswagens I went out to look at.
Right.
So I've gone in and messed around because I had some, they had the nice, well, like you're saying, you got the nice ones that go across here, and then you have a separate one that you got to go over top in the older ones.
Right.
Where it has two pieces.
Right.
So anyways, when I went to go take those out, I pulled on the one sitting and it just ripped right in half.
Hadn't even thought of that.
So I always kind of wondered if, but like you're saying, I can understand with the whole fraying and whatnot and all that stuff.
Right.
Anyways, they said that they fixed my timesheet issues, and they need to have me come up and log in to see what exactly is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, see if it's working.
They want you to show them for sure that it works.
Right. Because last time it didn't.
They want
so.
to make sure you're not doing something wrong. It's so complicated. You must be doing something wrong.
I know, right? So I'm gonna send this to this lady real quick.
All right. Like I said, there's only like 6 slides, 6, 7 slides, something like that left.
Okay.
All on a secondary air injection. And so our purpose of secondary air injection, of course, is to add some oxygen into the exhaust. And when we add oxygen into the exhaust, oxygen is a catalyst. Well, I guess I should say oxygen is, well, I've always heard of oxygen as being a catalyst. The true definition of a catalyst is something that won't be used up. Okay. The oxygen that we add into the exhaust, I guess technically is not being used up. It's being combined with other elements to form CO2 or water, right? So we inject it upstream. And when they say upstream, they mean in front of the catalytic converter.
Okay, not at the ones right at the very.
Not in the catalytic converter.
Okay.
And this is where it gets kind of confusing, because when we're talking about oxygen sensors, upstream, of course, is in front of the catalytic converter, downstream is past the catalytic converter. But when it comes to secondary air injection, downstream is actually going into the side of the converter.
Oh.
It's
Okay.
actually feeding half of the converter. Okay. And so, let me back up a second so you can kind of see. Well, there's a picture right there where this is actually backwards our oxidizing catalyst would be in front or upstream. That O2 sensor in that pipe is upstream from the catalytic converter. Okay, and so I may be thinking backwards, but for some reason in my head it's oxidizing first and then reduction. So, the upstream air, what goes into, a lot of our early ones had the pipes actually threading into the exhaust manifold, and so they threaded one in each runner on the exhaust, and they had this unit, you know, stainless steel pipe, but also it was a steel nut. You know, imagine the brake line, the nut on the end of a brake line, same situation. Piece of tubing that had it was almost like a metric bubble type flare, not a inverted flare like we see on our English brake line, standard thread brake lines, but more like the bubble type in on a metric brake line. And so inside the manifold was it was drilled and tapped and had a little seat cast into it. Some of them had inserts in them too. But that threads in and seals that pipe. Problem that we always have is when we have two dissimilar metals, there's always corrosion there. Okay? And so anytime you're dealing with exhaust manifolds, cast iron manifolds, anything that's attached to them or threaded to them is going to have some corrosion issues typically. And so those were bad about corroding into the manifold. So that injection tube came up, you know, you had on a V8 you had 4 runners coming up to a main pipe, and on the end of that pipe it was threaded, and we had a one-way check valve that threaded on there. Okay, that's so it couldn't blow exhaust into the air pump itself. And of course they occasionally would leak. Okay, and when it did, it blew exhaust into the air pump and fried the air pump basically. You know, the stuff coming out of our exhaust is pretty dirty. You know, a lot of some soot and all that stuff. So it's pretty aggressive on anything that's spinning like an air pump. You know, so hard on the bearings and stuff like that in air pumps. It was common for those pipes to eventually burn through also somewhere, start leaking. And so then you had to deal with getting those out of the exhaust manifold. And of course the first step is get some PB blaster or some penetrant oil and spray on those where they go into the manifold and just let them soak. You know, it's one of those deals where you want to spray them, and if you can, let it set overnight would be better. Then you have the situation of, if you're trying to take that off, most of them are tight enough that a line wrench will just round off. Okay? And so hopefully you're not in the situation, I need to remove this pipe and this pipe is still good and I need to put it back on. If it's something you're replacing because it's leaking, then we would just take a cutoff saw and cut the tube off right above the nut, and then you put a socket on there, you know, and then get them broke loose and put them out there. Once they break loose, they thread pretty easily usually. The downstream air, like I say, is a pipe going down into the side of the converter. And the converter has a short pipe coming out of it, usually at a 90. And then this pipe slid over it and had a U-clamp. Okay, so if you've ever dealt with exhaust clamps, you realize that when you've got 2 pieces of pipe and tighten that clamp down, it puts a little dent all the way around the pipe, basically. And so now you have, you know, this piece of pipe going over that one, and then there's this little dip in the tube. Okay, so it's not like you can take the clamp off and just slide it off, because now
Is that similar to what they have on the Mustang, that thing that, because it has 2 parts of it to come together, and then it's got a
I'd have to look and see which style it is.
Because I know we had a hard time getting those, because it has two parts, and it does have that clamp with the bolts in it, holding it together.
I think that's more like a clamp, like the big band they put on a barrel.
Mm-hmm, right.
Okay, this style I'm talking about is like a U-bolt on a rear axle
Oh, okay.
that goes around them and has a metal piece that goes across between the two. It's also got the radius built into it. When you tighten it down, it actually squeezes into the pipe.
Oh, okay.
So getting the clamp off is the easy part. And most of the times, half the time, you'll end up breaking the clamps because they'll rust and you can't get them loose. But this applies to any of those type connections. If you have that situation, you can't just grab it and pull it off of there, okay? You're going to need to heat it up with a torch, okay, until it's pretty much cherry red, okay? And sometimes, especially on the actual exhaust pipe, with a connection to a muffler or a converter that's a slit fit like that, if you'll heat it up red and take your ball peen hammer and tap around it right where that little groove is, where it's been shrunk down from that clamp, it'll slowly expand out. And you can get that outer layer to expand out. And, then we want to coal and keep it hot, keep the torch on it. They're not fun to do at all. And we saw a few of those air pipes. That was a stainless steel pipe that came from the air pump up by the, air pump's mounted up in front of the engine, right? It's belt driven. And so that pipe came off, went down, and had like a bracket that went under one of the bell housing bolts, kind of like a transmission dipstick, okay? And then went back there. So it's physically slid over that piece of pipe. So you got this rigid piece of stainless steel that's this long. And of course they would rust through from time to time, and they were just a nightmare to replace. But you may or may not have to deal with one of those. We're pretty much to the point of, I'm going to say at some point, I'm trying to think of year models and when they quit putting that downstream air pipe in there. And I'm going to say somewhere in the mid-80s. Okay? So they're only going to be on the older cars, and you're probably going to find that most of those older cars don't even have a converter on them anymore. Somebody's taking it off. And so that's an issue. Even if it has the converter, it probably don't have the air pump on it anymore, because that one's probably failed a long time ago. And so a lot of people just take them off. And you'll see a lot of vehicles running around that the belt's been cut off the air pump, and the air pump's still on there. It's just not doing anything. Right? Or the belt, or the pump locked up and it burned the belt, broke the belt, and it's gone. A lot of our vehicles, that air pump belt was a separate belt on the V-drive. Any of those that had regular V-belts, that air pump was its own separate belt in most cases, although there were some that used that belt also ran like the alternator or whatever. So on those, when they trash, then it's a problem. Well, it's always a problem, but like I say.
I think we only had one guy in our electrical class that had rebuilt his truck. And everybody else is all the new serpentine ones.
Right.
So it was tough finding a V-belt.
yeah, anything 88 and newer, and GM stuff. I don't know about Ford and Chrysler when they switched, but somewhere around the same time. Yeah, you don't see a lot of V-belt stuff anymore. So the downstream air there again, it's oxygen for the oxidation catalyst. So I guess on those, maybe those, now that I think about that, maybe those that had the downstream air, maybe they did have the reduction catalyst up front, which makes sense where they're putting the air in to add to the oxidizing catalyst.
So essentially, if the oxidizing was first, they would put it before that.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. If the oxidizing was first, in theory, They wouldn't need it because they're going in upstream of that anyway. Which, there again, that's what they're doing now, is they got rid of that air pipe going in the converter, and everything's going into the exhaust now. Either the exhaust manifolds are real close up there. And so that's why those are flipped around now. The advantage to some of that is that oxidizing catalyst helps reduce soot buildup in the reduction catalyst. And so when I was doing some studying on the diesel exhaust, DEF systems and all that, it was what I was seeing was they had their, let me rephrase that, on the light duty trucks, okay, up to 1 ton stuff, their oxidizing catalyst is first. Their reduction catalyst is where they're putting the urea in, okay. Some of the research stuff that I read was saying that the oxidizing catalyst is helping to reduce a little bit of oxides of nitrogen during that burn. There's also the fact that the light duty trucks also have that particulate filter behind this, okay? And that the oxidizing catalyst and the reduction catalyst, both of those are cutting down some of the ash buildup in the particulate filter. Whereas on the heavy trucks, big trucks, and stationary units and stuff, they've got the particulate filter in there first, and then both of their catalysts behind it. And so they're not getting any of that benefit of that, reducing some of that ash before it gets to the particulate filter. And so they're having to clean their particulate filters more often. You know, and on our light duty stuff, we do that regeneration to burn what's in that particulate filter out. And of course the heavy duty truck does too, but it can only do so much, and when that filter's full, they have to take it out and clean it. And that's a very expensive process. On our light duty vehicles, well, you don't have to clean it, but when it gets stopped up, you have to replace it. But I don't know how many of them have been replaced at this point, but I need to ask some of the dealership guys, how many of those are you seeing? How many of those you have to replace? And because I've really not heard that it's a common thing, but it's very common in heavy truck. Okay, well, let's see if this animation. No. And open the file. I'm not sure what the animation does. So, when we have air injection, we have to be able to control when we inject it. Okay? And on the early versions with downstream, we also control where we inject it. Okay? But all of the systems we have now are just going into the exhaust. You'll notice that we have diverter valves, air divert valves, they're called. And we had diverter valves on those early systems that had air injection into the cat also. And it was it had more functions to it, because it had to, basically our air injection either goes to the exhaust or to the atmosphere, or actually to the air cleaners where they divert it to. Now, you'll notice this one's an electric air pump. Okay, on our previous versions where it was a belt-driven air pump, it's running all the time. So they had to do something with that air. And so they would divert that to the air filter when we didn't want it going in our exhaust. Okay. And so in the early version, this version with that air injection downstream into the converter, we pump that air into the manifolds on cold start to help heat up the exhaust and heat up the converter, you know, because it's burning in there when there's anything raw, and especially on cold start with carbureted vehicles. And pretty much every one of these, I think I can say, at least on the GM ones, the ones that had the downstream converter, or downstream air in the converter, were carbureted vehicles. Okay, so they had more raw fuel going out the exhaust than anything else anyway. And so on startup, they would run that air injection into the exhaust manifolds to help burn more of that raw fuel that's going out. But that also heated up the converter faster to get it up to operating temperature. And then and they were set on a timer. Okay, so the computer's timing how long that diverter valve was diverted into the exhaust manifolds. And then when it got up to where they assumed it was a certain temperature, because at runtime, they switched it to the downstream injection. Okay. Now on deceleration, we have a real high fuel content, real rich mixture. Do that high vacuum on carbureted cars especially. Do that high vacuum. And if you're pumping air in the exhaust in either place on deceleration, it would backfire. Okay. And so to the point of, if there's enough fuel there, it'll blow the muffler or catalytic converter open. So that has to be diverted on deceleration. So all of those early diverter valves were vacuum controlled, and they would switch depending on what the application was. Well, the other part of that is a wide open throttle that carbureted cars go really rich too. So you don't want that air injection then. So in both, they had to deal with high vacuum situation on deceleration, and then low vacuum situation on wide open throttle. And so they were kind of funky looking valves that had several vacuum lines on them. Now that we've switched to electric air pumps, they're only on when we turn them on. Okay, so they don't necessarily have to divert to the air cleaner. They can just turn the pump off. And so when it comes to deceleration, shut the pump off. And on acceleration, of course, you know, it's computer controlled. We're looking at throttle position and that sort of thing. Also map sensor or mass airflow. So they can tell when they need to turn that off. The diverter valves are still there because we need to be able to switch the locations. In this particular diagram, they're still showing a vacuum source there. Okay, they're using vacuum operated diverter valves. Most of the manufacturers don't use vacuum; they use electronic switching solenoids now. So they've got rid of those in most cases. Okay, but basically, it's just a spring-loaded over a rubber diaphragm plunger moving up and down, so that it can allow it to flow or shut it off. Really pretty simple how they're designed. Those early systems, the diverter valve, since they were hooked to vacuum, manifold vacuum, that gave that a passage for the alcohol and the fuel and stuff to get in there, and it would also damage the rubber diaphragm in those. So we had a lot of those failures because of the alcohol and fuel at first, and then of course they changed the type of rubber in them, but the only way to fix it is replace it with a new style. And so anything that's hooked to manifold vacuum gets fuel vapor in there. Okay? And so depending on how big the hose is how fast it migrates up in there and can affect what type of rubber that was used. You know, all of the replacements for any of those should be compatible with alcohol, for sure. When it comes to testing them, there's so many different systems and all that, you're going to need service information. But you can also, you know, just think about, especially you get one of those with the three-way with the air going into the converter. You can feel the rubber hoses and tell where the air's blowing, typically. You don't have to actually take them loose to tell which way it's going. So you can feel the hose going into the manifolds, coming out of the air pump to the diverter valve, coming out of the diverter valve, I should say. Coming out of the diverter valve, you can feel when it's going to the ones to the manifold, and you can feel when it's going to the one down in the converter. And of course you can feel the one going, you can hear the one going in the air cleaner when it's diverting to the air cleaner. And you will see that you can sit there and rev the car up, and it will switch from exhaust to air cleaner on deceleration as the engine RPM is coming back down. You can hear it, it's pretty obvious. I haven't had the situation of anything being stopped up. Usually those one-way check valves, it's the other problem, it's leaking back. And so that's usually the issue. If you had one that was stopped up, you could determine if that was happening by probing the exhaust and determining if it was actually injecting in there or not. Might be easier just to look it and check it that way. You know. So, water WD2 air injection system, pump air only where?
Upstream.
Upstream.
Yeah.
Upstream. And they're basically all electric air pumps. That's it.
Wow.
So, what I'm doing, what I was doing before I came to class and I didn't get done, on the job sheets for last block, I'm just going in and giving everybody credit for those.
Okay.
Instead of trying to get with those people and remove them.
Right.
Go over there and give everybody a perfect score on those. What we will do is print those off and use them in this class. And I want to look, because I don't remember if I put any job sheets. I don't think I put any job sheets in this one as required, did I?
No.
Okay, yeah. So I don't look at that. So
Yeah, no, so we just have a fill in the blank essay, multiple choice, ASC questions, and the videos, and the data.
Data, yeah. Don't forget the data. So yeah, so this assignment sheet should be correct. So, multiple choice, questions 1 through 10 in the classroom manual, fill in the blanks 1 through 10 in the classroom manual.
I had a question for you too, on
Uh-huh.
the short answer essay.
Uh-huh,
Do we just pick one of those, or do we have to do all of them?
all of them,
Okay,
yeah, all 10 of them.
okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how to do those, never done those before, so.
Now, when it says short answer essay, that's kind of an arbitrary thing, but as short as you can make it, it makes sense. As long as you answer the question, that's all I worry about, you know.
Okay.
So yeah, that, the MindTap video questions, and I have on here job sheets and data. I better go in here and look. Because I have job sheets listed there.
Oh, excuse me.
Which is fine, it's just how I'm gonna do the grade,